Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at gcnlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
I was talking with Mackenzie just before the broadcast about Mike Ma, and Mackenzie went to a bachelor party, and they experienced some paintball action, and a couple of the guys got plinked. Well, we do the same thing with real guns, real cartridges, but wax projectiles. I was telling him I still have the scars. Mike Ma. Everyone all set? Cocked, locked, here we go. Your dial set correctly to USAPrepares.com. Broadcasting 2 hours from high atop the Missouri Ozark Mountains. Kyle's engineering the broadcast in Minnesota. Call a number 866-582-9933. 866-582-9933. Listen line 605-477-3249. 605-477-3249. The listen line's up 24/7. You can take us with you, and we'd be delighted to be with you. Rich Sheben's with us, offgridmontana.com. Welcome, Rich Sheben.
Well, thank you, Vincent Finelli. How are you this morning?
I'm doing really well. You know, I don't know about your neck of the woods, but I'll tell you what. We have been trying to drill some holes in the ground here at the farm near the house so we can mount our solar array. We just are having so much trouble. It's like drilling through concrete. The ground is so hard with this drought that we've had for the last several weeks. Are you experiencing a drought of any kind, or are you okay?
Well, I would say we're pretty close. We had a great winter and a great spring regarding precip and snow. And all of a sudden, we got into the 90s. We didn't hit 100 yet. We came really close. And this week, we're supposed to be in the mid-80s. So what I usually do is, like when I'm pounding posts, I usually hire off-grid homeschool kids to do that because of their timeliness and work ethic. And I hire them in the spring when the ground is moist and it's like a sponge pounding those metal posts through. So I personally wouldn't attempt to do that now, but because you're doing a solar array and you have tractors and augers, it's probably a different situation. I don't know what your rock accumulation is in your neck of the woods, but we have a lot of rocks on this property, and that's why they call it the Rocky Mountains. So seasonality has a lot to do with it, but it all depends on what you need to get done. You know, I understand.
Yeah. What I did yesterday was we have an auger, and it's got a 60 horsepower gearbox on it. Hooked it up to a 40 horsepower tractor. Or it was on the track with the power takeoff on the back of the tractor, and wasn't getting anywhere. It was just skipping along the top of the ground. So I took a front end loader, another 40 horsepower tractor with a front end loader, and I put about 1,500, 2,000 pounds of weight down on the auger that we were trying to drill with. And that worked really well until the auger broke. So we got maybe 4, 5, 6 inches down with that. So what we decided to do was just change augers, go to a 12-inch auger with a different kind of cutting system, and then start filling the holes with water. So last night we filled these little depressions with water, put some buckets over it. This morning got out before the broadcast, started filling with water. I'll do that 3 or 4 times during the day while we're cutting hay. And hopefully maybe by tomorrow or the next day we'll have enough water in there, enough moisture to be able to drill down, several feet and start pouring the concrete for the piers. I'm all excited about getting this solar array up because, frankly, we just don't have 3,000 watts of solar is not enough to get by with what we're trying to do here on the farm. If we run at 80% of 3,000 watts, it's not enough. And that's when the sun is just perfect to get about 80%. So there's another thing that the class ought to know about, that if you set up a solar array and you think that you're going to be able to get whatever the panel wattage is, 24 hours a day. First of all, that doesn't work because the sun's not out 24 hours a day. You might get 5 hours of 80% if everything's working properly. 5 hours of 80% of whatever the panels are rated. Is that what you're experiencing, Rich?
Well, this is what I do. I have as you know, I have a very small system. I have a 675 amp hour system. Okay, I have about 1,200 watts of solar panels, and I have a 7,000 watt generator. So 8 months out of the year, I get a plethora of energy. I just don't even use it. And as you mentioned just a few moments ago, I like to stay at 80% of power and not decrease much, especially during the winter months. And this is where I'm going with this. During the winter months, folks, if you ever want to go off-grid, like here in northwest Montana, we get lots of clouds. I have a little bit of a northern slope in the way of southern exposure. So what you need to do is figure out your usage and lifestyle accordingly to the size of your system, your wattage for solar panels, and where you place them. And that's going to be, because 8 months out of the year, the sun's so high, especially in the North Country, that we don't even think about it. In fact, the sun is so high here and the days are so long. On June, even right now, the sun, you can start seeing about 5:30 a.m., you can start seeing the sun come up and or getting light, and it stays light till 10:30. So I keep my solar panels on the winter solstice setting. In other words, I don't tilt them up towards the sun in the summer because I get so much light. So I just keep them at the winter position year-round. So when that 3 to 4 months of winter hits, the shortest days of the year, I'm positioned properly. So that's kind of how the research that I've done, because let's say you have a 5-gallon container and you have to fill it up to full once a week, which you do with lead-acid batteries. So the lead-acid battery, use the container as an analogy here. So you have a 5-gallon container versus 1 cup container. 1 cup is a very small system in the analogy of the lead-acid battery. It's a lot easier to fill up a cup to almost full once a week if you're using lead-acid batteries than it would be if you're filling up a 5-gallon jug. In other words, the supplemental energy which you would use for a generator to fill up those batteries, you don't have to run it all day long every day like some people do because they have this huge system and they want to run all this stuff. So you got to think of it according to your lifestyle, how rugged you want to be, and there's other alternatives like the nickel iron that you're using, Vince, or what's really getting popular is the silicon salt out of China. It's not a lead-acid battery. It's sealed, and there's no maintenance, no equalizing. You don't have to fill it up once a week. It's really getting quite popular, and a lot of people are going that direction, Vince.
Yeah. We chose, I don't know much about that. We haven't studied that very much. And we made the decision last year. And it took us, we got the batteries right from the manufacturer. So we saved a tremendous amount of cost. But when we were working with the manufacturer, we decided that I'm talking about Bruce K. and I split a load, over 8,000 pounds of batteries. And we went with the nickel iron. And the reason that we chose them was because we could take a depth of discharge of 50% without damaging them. So the plan was, if we wanted to go down half, it worked for us. And we don't know how long they're going to last, because from what we can tell, they can last generations. And how do you renew them? Well, you dump out the electrolyte and you refill them. It's as simple as that. And I can tell you that they're quite substantial, quite sturdy. And so far, they're working really, really well. However, the battery box that we have is 8 feet long, 3 feet wide, and over 3 feet tall for the batteries. And our half is about a little over 4,000 pounds. So it's a considerable amount of mass. It takes a considerable amount of space. And some people have them outside, in a shed. And you need to protect them. You don't want sunlight on them to destroy the cases. So you want to protect them. And and they kind of like the temperatures that people like. And that's how we protect ours. And also the cable. The cable's really, really expensive. If you're going to use a copper cable to go from the battery to the inverter, you're looking at easily $4 a foot. $4 a foot for copper. And that's without the connectors on the end. If you want the connectors, they're going to be about $7 or $8, $10 a piece, depending on the quality and type of connector. And then if you don't have the tool that costs $2,000 to put those connectors on, if you don't have access to one, you'll have to pay someone to do it. Fortunately, the electric supply company let us use their tool right then and there. We just cut the cables, put them on the floor, skinned them, trimmed them, and put the cable ends on, and they let us use this hydraulic tool. And it worked really well for us. So we're up and running, and we're experimenting with lots of changes. And we keep tweaking our system. It's changed probably, 15 or 20 times in a couple weeks. And I'm talking about minor changes, things to make it better. And I'm going to share that in a class with on the radio, things that we found that really make sense, and we can save you a lot of time, and we can save you a lot of money because we've tried lots of things. We know what really works well, and we know what works just okay. So, have you experimented with yours, Rich? Have you modified your system at all?
Well, I've been off grid for over 10 years now, and so a lot of the technology has changed. And for example, they have. I looked into nickel iron, but here in Montana, it's tougher to do because they prefer plus 45 degree Fahrenheit temperatures, and here where I live, that's very difficult to do, even though my solar shed and I have a box that is both insulated. It's almost impossible during the below zero temperatures to keep it above 45 degrees. It's usually probably, it rarely freezes, but sometimes it does, but it's still not that 45 degree mark. But a lot of the technology has changed. For example, inverters. I have a 110 volt inverter, and I'll finish that statement on the other side.
Yeah, Rich Sheben's with us, and you're getting a chance to hear about experience. 10 years off the grid. Not very many people can say that they've been off the grid for 10 years. We'll be right back. Rich Sheben's with us, offgridmontana.com. David in Illinois, welcome. You're on with Rich Sheben and David.
I was listening to your show. Now, we've been putting together a solar unit and trying to get it put together, but I'm thinking about downside because we haven't been able to get it installed. We got hit by those tornadoes in February. You know, we're not far from you. Mm-hmm. So we got a dozen Mitsubishi panels and a 240 inverter with digital remote. We just don't have the battery. We got an Outback 80, and it's just sitting in boxes. But we were going to do the batteries, but we weren't sure also what kind of batteries to go with.
Well, there are lots of choices, and probably the easiest to get into would be the lead-acid battery. It requires typically maintenance, checking the water level, which is no big deal. Would you agree with that, Rich Sheben?
Absolutely. I check my electrolytes about every 2 months, and I add distilled water. Takes about 10 minutes for all my batteries, and it's pretty simple.
I have a problem with that, though.
Why?
My wife, she's from the Chinook Air Force Base, so she got contaminated from there, so she can't see anymore. We listened to your show about the base, and so I need something maintenance-free.
Okay. Well, my suggestion would be to go with the... you do live in... a warm area,
Illinois.
Iron like this uses as possible. But I would really look into the silicon salts out of China. They're getting really popular here in Montana. They're sealed, so they're maintenance-free. You don't have to equalize them. You don't have to fill it up every week like you do with the lead acid. So I would really look into the silicon salts out of China. There's not a lot of... Go to backwoodssolar.com. They're out of Sandpoint, Idaho, and I think they're one of the few dealers in America. And they're great for customer service. I speak to them on a regular basis, and they've taught me a lot. And all their people there are experts and you can get all the information you need. And there's a guy up in Calgary who distributes for Backwoods Solar, I believe. So you can get them here in the States. I know a lot of people, because of cost, they go to shipping areas like Portland, Oregon, and things like that, and they meet the Chinese ships, so they don't have to pay for the shipping. With you being in the middle of the country, you'd have to look probably down in like Corpus Christi or somewhere down in Texas to find out if you have the ability to pick them up. If not, just pay a few extra bucks. But I think from what I'm reading that they will last 20, 30 years with no maintenance. And like Vince was saying about the nickel iron, you can let those batteries go down to 50% with lead acid. If I want to keep my shelf life, I try not to go below 80% very often. So I hope that helps.
David, what we're saying is, if you take the full battery, full charge, and let's say you have like a car, and you've got a lead acid battery in a car, for example, and you have you try to crank it and the car doesn't start, and you crank it, and pretty soon you have a dead battery. When you take it down that low, you've damaged the battery. And you're not going to get back the damage that you've caused. I'm not saying that you've done it intentionally, but we've all done this, okay? So you've shortened the life of the battery. It happens a couple times, and you keep shortening the life of the battery. So the concern with the lead acid battery, and I'm saying this for the entire class, the concern is if you take it below 20% of full charge, okay? Just take it down more than 20%. You are starting to damage the life expectancy of that battery. So while we think that we have, from full to empty, we don't. We have from full to 80% full before we start damaging the battery. So the reason that Rich Scheben is able to get his batteries to last so long is he's really careful. He does not take them down, below what? You take them down to 20% of from full, right? 80% full, right?
Correct. Because if I go too low, I set it so my inverter shuts off purposely. In fact, I've got a trimeter, David, that it's a tool that can measure the amps coming in, going out, the life of the battery, the volts, all this stuff. So if you get one of those tools, I'd write that down and make sure you put that in your system.
Now, our inverter also has a wireless digital control unit with it as well, where you can control everything.
Do you have any other questions for us, David?
Yeah. Hey, I was hoping you would have called me back from last week.
Leave your number one more time, David.
Okay.
Leave your. Our engineer will take it and I'll call you. I got overwhelmed. I apologize. Off Grid Montana, Rich Scheben's with us. So, Rich, you were talking about you've been off the grid for 10 years, and you were going to share some more information with us before David called in. Yep. Hey, did we lose Rich Scheben?
No, I'm here.
Okay.
It's just FYI, I've had two periods of about 10 seconds that I lost audio.
Okay.
So,
all right. I'm looking. Okay. All right. I'll just, I've switched screens. I'm now looking at, instead of audio metering, I'm looking at, the screen that'll show me frame loss. So I'm watching it from here too. Okay. So please share with us, some more of the story about this off-grid living. You've been doing it for 10 years, which is a very long time in the off-grid living lifestyle compared to most people.
Yeah. Well, I have a 1 horsepower pump because my static water is only 40 feet deep, even though my well is 250. So despite that, back in the day, they only made 110-volt inverters. And now, from your last caller, he obviously bought a 240, which is good because you can pump up water using your battery system because your inverter can handle the voltage. So, and there's another way to do it. You could wire in unison two 110-volt inverters together to get the 240. But I chose not to do that because even during the summer months when I use the most amount of water to water the garden, and I'm stretching this, I would say it's a miracle if I use 5 gallons of gasoline per week, which if I go to town with my pickup truck, round trip, I probably use close to that just for doing that. So it's not that big of a deal to use my generator. And when I use it for that 4 months out of the year, to supplement and pump up water, I'm killing two birds with one stone, and banking amps and voltage at the same time. So because I'm in the North Country, I chose to do it that way. Again, it all depends on your skill sets, on how rugged of a lifestyle you want to lead. You know, I can live in this cabin easily without electricity, so I set it up that way. And most people can't live in their homes. They can't flush their toilets. They can't use their faucets. They can't, you know, the refrigerator, the freezer, everything dies. I'm set up to live in this in case I don't have electricity. So I choose to live a little more rugged than most people. I love the lifestyle. The skill sets can't be measured that I've acquired. And, I mean, look what we're teaching our kids, how to push buttons, manage paper, and be politically correct. They are not learning these things. And that's why I'm such a proponent of buying rural property and living where the human population to natural resource ratio is not compromised. Vince?
You know, as you were saying that, I was looking at transformers. I went to eBay, and I was looking at 2-to-1 transformers. And what you can do is you can, I don't think this one's big enough. Yeah, 1,000 watts. Depending on how many horsepower your pump. How many horsepower is your pump? Your well pump?
One horsepower.
Okay, that's 746 watts for 1 horsepower. But it's going to take 2 to 3 times that amount of current in order to start the pump. So if you had, maybe a 1,500 to 2,000 watt transformer, you can buy one that will take 120 and make it 240 with just a transformer, and that's a possibility. So that can be done. And I was considering doing that here when we were looking years and years ago at 120 volt systems. But instead we got, technology has changed, as you said, and we have a 240 volt system. So right now our well is running on 240 volts. And we have I wouldn't say it's a deep well, but it's, a couple hundred feet deep. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, Rich, why don't we tell the class that, storing electricity is expensive. If you want to store it, batteries and capacitors are pretty much our options. But if you want to store water, that's not so expensive. So what we're saying is, instead of storing the electricity and then pumping the water later, you can pump the water now while you have the solar power, while the sun is shining, when the sun is on your panels. Pump the water into a tank, make sure the tank is above where you need it, and then let gravity do the work of bringing the water down. Is that what you do?
I don't do that. I've thought about doing that, but because I don't have a 240 volt inverter and I would still have to use gasoline to pump up the water, I chose not to. If I ever move or update my system, because like we've both admitted, technology, in the last 10 years has changed dramatically.
Yep.
I mean, living off grid is not that hard. And you just got to study, you just got to read, you got to research, you got to talk to people. There's a lot of courses out there, whether it be online. In fact, you don't even need a course. You can probably read all you need to know on the internet. And what you just suggest, Vince, is a great idea. If you have a plethora of sun, like most of us do during the summer months, especially here in the North Country, and you have a 240 volt inverter, you might as well pump it up to a tank or a water saver so you can use it as a gravity feed to water your garden, for example, during the long days. And this way you're not using your gasoline. So there's a few things I would do a little differently if I started today compared to when I started over 10 years ago. I think the biggest thing would be, instead of using lead-acid batteries like I mentioned to your caller, I would use the silicon salt batteries that have just really improved the situation dramatically.
Well, I'll tell you what I found. I just found this on eBay, as you were talking about. A 2 kilovolt amp transformer, single phase. It will convert 240 to 120. $50 used. $50. Now, it's for free local pickup in North Carolina, but I have a feeling if you said to the guy, I'll tell you what, how about we just add another $35 for shipping and putting this in a heavy box, because it's going to be a heavy transformer. Maybe $25, maybe $20 would do it. So I'm thinking way less than $100, you could have this transformer to do that job. So for those of you thinking about the 240 volt problem with your well pump, that is a solution. Okay. And we'll get one of our engineers on. I'll ask Bruce Kay to come back on with us and talk about this. This is right up his alley. He is an electrical engineer. So is Bert Bertonis. Both of those guys could help us. But we'll get some information out there about how to do this. And off-grid living is really kind of nice because one of the things that I did, Rich, even you probably saw it in the kitchen, was I have some LED lighting. And the idea was, have solar panels charge a battery, a 12-volt battery in the garage, let's say, and then run 12-volt wire into the kitchen to a light switch, and you can just turn on the lights if the power goes down. Well, if the power fails for you, it's not a big deal. It's like you wouldn't know it anyway, right?
Right.
Because you don't have electricity brought into your cabin on your ranch. So it's no big deal. You're off the grid all the time, 24/7. Well, in our case, if the grid went down, we wouldn't have lighting. And the first thing that people do when the power goes out is they look for matches, they look for kerosene. Well, that's crazy. It's crazy because, kerosene can start fires. And we have a big dog, Thomas Jefferson. His head, he can just put his head on the kitchen table. If he turns around in the kitchen, his tail can knock over a kerosene lamp. And kerosene smells. And I don't like the idea of that anyway. So we don't have that in our house. We have the 12-volt LEDs on strips that I mounted around the perimeter of the kitchen on a regular light switch like you'd have to turn on a light anywhere in the rest of the house. Well, that works fine, and it has for years. But we don't need that anymore because we're off-grid for the most part. But what we found out, Rich Scheben, was there are loads that we can't power up right now. For example, if I'm on the air and Mrs. Finelli wants to vacuum part of the house, well, a vacuum cleaner draws a significant load. Electric motors draw a lot of power. So that's a problem. And if it's early in the morning and the sun's not out and the batteries are depleted from overnight use, well, she can't vacuum until the sun comes out or until we put more panels out, which is what we're doing. Or let's say she wants to run the clothes washer at the same time she's vacuuming. Now, who doesn't do that? Lots of people do that. But you can't always do that if the sun's not shining or if you don't have enough charge in the battery. Or let's say she wants to run the dishwasher while she's running the washing machine, while she's vacuuming, trying to be efficient. Well, you can't always do that. So here's what Bruce Kay came up with, and this is absolutely brilliant. It won't work for Rich Scheben because he doesn't have the grid. But if you have the grid, you can get a simple switch, and it's called a three-way switch. You can buy them on eBay. I bought a 10-pack. 10-pack of these switches was about $25 for all 10 of them. And I bought the box. I bought a 6-gang electrical box. Actually, what I bought was 6 gangable boxes in metal, 2.5 inches deep, and I'm going to screw them together. And they're made that way. And so now I can put 6 three-way switches in this 6-gang box. And here's how it goes. The load goes to the common terminal of the switch. The other 2 terminals of the switch, one terminal will go to the grid side of a grid panel. The other terminal will go to the load side of the inverter. And in the kitchen, I can throw the switch. And I can say, dishwasher, you're either on the grid or off the grid. Clothes washing machine, you're on the grid or off the grid. And so forth.
Very
and
good
we
idea.
have 6. And how much does it cost? Well, the boxes were about $2 a piece with change. That's like $12. The switches were $25 for 10. Now, why did I buy 10? Because I figured that they may fail over time. And so if I'm going to use 6 of them, I'll have 4 spares. And they'll all match. And I bought, now you can buy less expensive switches. You can get them for about $1 a piece if you want on eBay. However, I bought commercial grade, commercial rated 20 amp switches because I'm using 20 amp circuits. And this is not my idea, class. I have sent Bruce Kay email after email saying, Bruce, this is like the coolest thing. This is like the best idea. This is the most simply elegant idea. Absolutely brilliant. And it is. So, class, I guess I'll have to do a post or a YouTube video exactly how this works, or Bruce can do it. It's his idea, and it really is great. So, just a little tip about off-grid solar living and how that works, because you may not have enough power electricity to do everything you want, when you want. We'll be right back. You know, I have a feeling Kyle Harris is in class today. And I know Kyle Harris would know the answer to this question about the 2-to-1 transformers. And I found a whole bunch more on eBay. So yeah, they're there. So Kyle, if you're in class today and you want to weigh in and let us know what your thoughts about using an AC alternating current transformer to move the voltage by a factor of 2 from 120 to 240 volts for a well pump, we'd love to hear from you. You know, Rich Scheben, one of the things I ran into was in our automotive shop, which is part of our house, we have fluorescent lighting. There's those 8-foot tubes of fluorescent lighting, and they're 80 watts apiece. So if you have 2 of them and you power them on, that's 80 plus 80, 160 watts. Add in the balance, you're running about 200 watts. Well, in order to light up, you know, the 3 bays, we have 7 of them. So that's 7 times 200 watts, 1,400 watts. That was a problem. That was a problem several days ago for our son, because I'm on the air and he wants to work early in the morning in the automotive shop fixing farm equipment, and he can't because the sun's not out and the batteries have been drained overnight, or the battery has been drained overnight. So what we decided to do was this grid/inverter switch that Bruce Kay talked about. And I temporarily hooked it up to test it to see if it works. And it works really, really well. So I just wanted to share that with you. Jay in Nebraska,
sense.
Welcome. Yeah.
Hey, good
Jay in
morning,
Nebraska,
Vince.
welcome.
This is a really, really awesome subject. Now, I haven't looked too much into the off-grid and what size batteries do you need for a household? I mean, I'm guessing these are not, 2 or 4 marine deep cycle batteries, right?
No, that's not going to make it. No, I mean, if you have a very, very small cabin and you're running LED lighting, and let's say you have an ammonia evaporative refrigerator that runs on propane, and let's say you have a propane cooktop or a propane stove that is a vintage one that uses pilot lights rather than a 600-watt igniter for the broiler, okay? And you just want to have a small television, maybe, DVD player, a Blu-ray player, radio, notebook computer. You could probably get by with what you're talking about. But if you have more than that, if you want to run a washing machine, no, you won't have enough. You won't have enough storage unless you have a lot of panels, and you do the running the washing machine during the day, and you've got an inverter that is several thousand watts. Rich, your thoughts?
Well, caller, I live in the North Country, so like Vince mentioned earlier about electric motors taking up a lot. It could be coffee makers take up mediocre amounts, irons take up a lot, hair dryers take up a lot. Air conditioners would be a torturous situation for off-grid living.
Can't be done.
Now,
Can't be done for most people.
Yeah, because I live in the North Country, air conditioning is not necessary. I just open up my windows and my doors, and in a matter of minutes, it's cool, because here in northwest Montana, it's rare, even in the summer, when it stays above 60 degrees at night. Rare.
Right.
So all that cool air heats up my home. So it's a little easier in the North Country, actually, because we don't need those electric motors and we use wood heat. So that being said, it all depends, and I say this regarding anything, self-sufficiency, economy, finance, social, political things. The answer to most questions is it depends. And I'll go into a little more detail after the break. But it depends on how rugged you want to live and your capital resources or cash. Depends on how much land you have. Depends on your whole situation. And we can go into that after the break.
Jay, do you want to hold while we go through the break?
Yes, please.
Okay, so are you driving?
Yes, I am.
I bet you are. I'll bet you are, because I see Jay in Missouri, Jay in Nebraska, Jay in Arkansas. We'll be right back. Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Hour number 2 of USAPrepares.com. Rich Sheben's with us, off-grid, Montana.com. And during the commercial top of the hour news and break, I went and checked the solar charge converter. We're generating about 1,500 watts of solar power right this moment at about 56 volts. About 1,500 watts. It's not peak. When we hit peak with this particular array that we have, this first of the several arrays we're building, we can generate about 2,200 watts. We've got Jay in Nebraska. He's with us, and Terry, you're up next. Jay, we were talking with you about the size of the battery bank. The least expensive way to get in my opinion, is lead-acid batteries, marine batteries that you can get at the Chinese factory outlet. In my opinion, and there's some discussion about this, but in my opinion, the higher the voltage you start with in your battery bank, the more efficient your system is going to be. So if you start with a 12-volt system, it will be less efficient than a 24-volt system, which will be less efficient than a 36 and less efficient than a 48. Our particular system is a 48-volt system. Yeah, and there's several reasons why. It's really hard to move a lot of current at a low voltage. So, for example, we have on our barn roof the solar panels, and I ran underground cable from the barn to the house. Now, we're running about 96 volts underground, and I buried in conduit aluminum cable, 2-gauge aluminum cable called triplex. I'm using one of the conductors as a ground, one as a plus, and one as a minus. So because it's such a long run, about 100 feet underground, 100 feet of cable buried 3 feet underground, because of that, there's voltage loss. And if I were using a 12-volt system, it'd be very difficult to move enough current at 12 volts. But at 48 volts battery bank, I can send the solar panels I have in series. I have 3 of them in series, and they're about 32 volts apiece. So 32 plus 32 plus 32 is 96. So I'm sending 96 volts DC underground to the charge controller, which is at the house. So it's working better for us for that kind of an arrangement. Now that's one array, but the next array will be closer to the house. And then the next array will probably be another 100 feet. So we're going to have ultimately 3 solar panel arrays. But a 48-volt system, in my opinion, is more efficient in converting 48 volts DC to 120 or 240 volts AC. It's a smaller jump up, in my opinion. But there are other people who disagree with me. And I'd love to hear what Bruce Kay has to say about that, or Kyle Harris, or Bert Pertonis. Jay in Nebraska, did you have something else that you wanted to check in with us about?
Yeah, I've got several questions. I mean, I find this topic fascinating. Okay, now, a job I used to be a forklift operator, and we had electric forklifts, and we had these really huge 24-volt batteries. And, I mean, it would take 8-10 hours to recharge from,
right,
empty. Would one of those be sufficient? And I know they have 3,000-watt inverters now, for regular use. Would one of those be, when it was one of those batteries? Yeah.
The answer is yes. And you're talking about a lead-acid battery, and it comes in a large crate, if you will. And
right.
it's kind of self-contained. They're all wired together. You're absolutely right. Yes, you can, and you can buy them used. As a matter of fact, I was talking with Scott Hunt. He's one of our instructors. He is a consultant, a solar-type consultant, contracting consultant, and he wrote the Doomsday Prepper Test. that I took about preparedness. And he's going to be on the air with us in a couple weeks. And I believe that's the system that he used because he found that is the least expensive. He may correct me, but I believe that that's what he's using temporarily because he found it to be the least expensive system. However, if you buy a used one, it's not up to snuff typically. But what you can do is you can get a battery desulfator, which is what we've used here at the farm on all of our lead acid batteries. They go in like the bulldozer and the backhoe and the trucks and the tractors. And we just have a small desulfator, and it just ticks along, and it just slowly blasts the sulfate off the plates of the lead acid batteries. And it renews them. And it works great. But it takes 1 day per pound of battery to desulfate. So if you're talking about, a 100-pound battery, well, let's say a 70-pound battery that you might have as a marine battery that is slowly deteriorating, it would take 1 day per pound to desulfate it, a little over 2 months. But in the battery that you're talking about would probably weigh, hundreds of pounds, which might take a year. But yes, it works. And the military uses, in Europe, the military uses these desulfators on the military vehicles all the time. So when you're running the vehicle, it's desulfating the batteries. That's how good this technology is. And it's simple. All it does is it builds up a charge in a capacitor in a desulfator. It stores the charge for a short time and then releases the charge. And it's at a higher voltage than the battery is used to operating. So it's a little tickle to the battery, and it just slowly blasts off the sulfate without destroying the battery. It really works well.
Okay,
and you can pick them up on... Yes.
Got another question. Okay, now, Thursday I left Phoenix, Arizona, Tucson. It's 111 out there. Is it feasible to be off-grid on electric and everything using AC down there?
If you're talking about air conditioning, Scott Hunt is going to come on the air with us and talking about different alternatives to air conditioning. Because here's the problem. As Rich Scheben mentioned, when you run an electric motor, they are electricity consumers. They draw a lot of electrical power. And when they start up, they draw 2 to 3 times more than when they're running. So that's the problem, starting up an electric motor. And if you live in a temperature of that high in Arizona, you're going to have air conditioning, right? Unless you live underground. Isn't that right? Okay.
Yeah.
Air conditioning
today in Phoenix, it's supposed to be 103.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's 103. But the roof temperature is probably, depending on the kind of roof you have, I would think that the roof would be 160, 170, 180 degrees.
Right.
I'm talking about the roof of a house. Even if it's a terracotta roof, it's going to be really, really hot. Well, that's the problem in that part of the world. It really is, air conditioning. And also, in our part of the world, in Missouri, where it's not quite that bad, it's not even nearly that bad in terms of temperature, our problem is refrigeration, okay? Along with the well pump, but that's not too bad because we don't operate the well pump 24 hours a day. But the refrigeration, if you have a freezer, let's say a freezer in the garage, or 2 freezers in the garage, and a refrigerator in the kitchen, now you have 3 compressors.
Yeah.
That's getting a little difficult. And then if you add air conditioning onto that, that's a big problem. And I'll tell you how we solved part of the air conditioning problem. It's not completely solved here. What we've done is I've split the load. We have the outside compressors. We have 2 of them, Lennox 19 SEER. They're 12 years old. And they are 2.5/4 tons each. That's not weight. That would be the capacity. So they're rated in tons of air conditioning capacity. What I've done is I've put the air conditioning compressors, the outside units, on the grid. So when they fire up that heavy 30 amp load to start it up, that's on the grid. Currently, our off-grid system can't handle those. But what we do have is the air handlers on the inside of the house. They are off the grid. So I've split the system. So the unit that moves the air throughout the house is off-grid. The outside compressors are on-grid. And here's what that means. In the wintertime, we need to use the indoor air handlers to circulate the air because we have a heat exchanger in them that is heated by our outdoor wood furnace. So we have off-grid air circulation for heat, but not for air conditioning completely.
Fascinating.
I hope I...
And Jay,
hope
can I
said that.
address a couple of concerns you had earlier, a couple of questions, if I may? If you use used batteries, you got to make sure you have an accurate hydrometer to check each battery cell on a fairly regular basis. In other words, get specific gravity readings, which is a measurement of the density of the liquid, and have an accurate voltmeter. Because if you have the way lead-acid batteries work, if you have one or two bad batteries that you're not aware of, and you've bought some pretty high-tech, expensive batteries for the rest of your array, those batteries will actually bring down, those one or two bad batteries will bring down your whole set. So you got to be very careful. I'm not a big proponent of using used batteries unless you know exactly how they've been used, where they've come from, how old they are, and what condition they're in. And you were talking about 12-volt, 24-volt, 48-volt. I would definitely go 24 or 48. I have a 24, and I'd probably go 48 next time. The 12-volt is mostly used for the small cabin setup when people want to use a DC system and not an AC system. So you're going to be a little more limited with a 12-volt system. And don't chins on the gauge or the aught of the size of the wire. The bigger the wire, the less resistance. And the closer the solar array is from the panels to your batteries, from your batteries to your home, the less resistance you're going to have as well. So keep that in mind. I just wanted to address those few issues.
Rich, even those are very, very good points. Very good points. Jay, we've got to run. We've got Terry in Kansas. You're up next. And Terry wants to talk about solar panels as well. Today,
all right, thanks, Ben.
we're talking about... Hey, thank you so much. Appreciate it, Jay. All right, Rich Scheben, I'll be right back. Rich Scheben's with us, and Terry in Kansas. Thank you so much for being so patient and waiting on hold. You're on the air.
Oh, hi. Yeah,
Hey.
I was considering going solar, and I got on this website, environmentalprogress.org, and it explains the toxicity of these solar panels. It says that they're made out of lead and cadmium, and the process to make them with phosphine gas and some of these dangerous chemicals makes them difficult to recycle. Do you know anything about? Do you agree with what this article is saying?
Well, I have not read the article, but let me share with you my thoughts. If you want to generate electricity, there's almost no way to do it. I don't know of any way to generate electricity without damaging the environment in some way. If you were to take a strip of zinc and a strip of copper and put it into an electrolyte solution, you would create a cell, and it would generate DC voltage. And depending on the surface area of the strips of zinc and copper would depend on the amount of current that you would produce. But to produce the zinc strip would involve mining and smelting and manufacturing, which is toxic to the environment. The same with copper. So that's a very, very simple example. I wish there were a way to generate electricity without pollution of any kind. But I don't know of any way, because even if we have a gas turbine, even if it's natural gas, even if we put the turbine right over the borehole that produces the natural gas, we still manufactured the turbine. And there's still the combustion gases from the burning of the natural gas. There's pollution from the wire. There's pollution from the vinyl jacket, the rubber jacket, the manufacturing of the terminals, everything involved in electric power generation. So I'd love to have a clean answer. Nuclear power, we were told, one of my instructors was Isaac Asimov back in the 1960s, the early 1960s. And I remember being in class with him. And I remember learning about the power of the atom. It was absolutely clean. We were going to have almost free electricity. Back then, the electric bills were $7 for a whole household. Now they're $400.
What about the old Tesla technology? It seems like that would be the only clean way, or that may not even be clean. Who knows?
Well, where does okay, Tesla would be the transmission, right, of the electricity. Is that what you're talking about? But
well, how he gets it free out of the air, and
Oh, well, okay. But we still have to manufacture the equipment to get it, right? That's the problem. There is no way. I mean, let me give out the phone number. If someone knows a way, I'd love to hear it. And I'm sure Rich Scheben would too. 866-582-9933. Is there a way of getting free energy without pollution?
Well, he made the big tower, and then they tore it down before he could demonstrate it,
Well, he actually did demonstrate it and set the nearby city on fire.
Oh, I heard about that, yeah. I heard something about it.
Yeah.
That's why I say if you could do it safely, who knows?
Well, here's how I look at it. Bruce Kay and I have embarked on a way. Bruce Kay and I are frugal. And I'm pretty darn sure that Rich Scheben is right up there with us. Rich, you're frugal, right? You don't waste money any way, shape, or form. Right. Okay. So all of us here at USA Prepares are frugal. And we are, Rich Scheben, Bruce Kay, and I are all looking at better ways of doing things that cost less, that are viable. And we're going to bring you more and more solutions as we uncover them. But I really don't know of a viable way of generating electricity and transmitting electricity without some kind of pollution. I really don't. But let me tell you where I'm going with this. The panels that I bought them in a surplus market. What that means is they were already in a warehouse for a couple years. And I bought them very, very inexpensively. So it's not like I was part of the problem in buying the panels and driving production. I was driving the reduction of the panels in a surplus warehouse. Now, I did buy new batteries. Yeah, that I did. And there's pollution involved in that. And shipping them thousands of miles from across the ocean. There's pollution in that, too. I don't know how to get around it. Terry, I wish there were a solution. I'd be all for it.
Okay, so thanks, Vincent.
Okay, thank you. We'll be right back. We were talking about being frugal with Rich Scheben, offgridmontana.com. So, Rich, let me share this little prototype that I built here at the farm. I think it might be of interest. It might even work for some of what you're doing in Montana. And it's going to take me about a minute to describe this. So we have this barn roof glass, and it's a 412 pitch. It's a steel roof. And we have 16 panels, 16 panels on top of the roof. And they're aimed south. It's not at the ideal angle, but it was a prototype to see how everything worked. The panels are 200-watt panels made by Canadian Solar. And they're probably 5 years old now. Well, because of the way we set up our Snyder inverter at 48 volts, I wanted to hook up less than 100 volts of 100 volts going to the charge controller from the panels. Each of the panels is 32 volts. So I took 3 panels and put them in series. 32 plus 32 plus 32 equals 96. And I built 5 strings of these 3 panels each. So 3 panels in series is 96 volts. And I put 5 sets of them in parallel. Okay, that is the array. That means that I have 1 panel left over, because 5 panels have 5 strings of 3 panels each is 15 panels. I had 1 left over, and it bothered me. I thought, I've got 1 panel there sitting on the roof doing nothing. Well, it's a spare in case one of them gets broken by hail or something, but it's still doing nothing right now. So what I did was I wired that to a charge controller I bought on eBay, a separate little charge controller, less than $20, probably close to $15. And it's a 20 amp charge controller just for this 1 panel. And I use that to charge batteries in the barn. Now think about this. So I took a panel I already had, added $15 or $20 for a charge controller, and then I added some wire that I had around the house. It was 16 gauge wire. I bought an electrical box, which is a single gang box for $1. I had light switch, a regular wall light switch that I used to control the voltage or the current from the solar panel to this little charge controller. Just a wall switch mounted on the wall right next to this little charge controller. and the output of the charge controller goes to a set of charging cables with cable clamps on it. Now, that's prototype version 1.0, and it really works great. And all I do is I turn the switch off, no power to the charge controller until I hook up the battery clamps. The battery sits below the charge controller on the floor. I hook up the positive and negative to the battery clamps, and then I turn on the charge controller with the AC wall switch that just is used for the charge controller. And it works great. It's unbelievable. So it's a little slower because you can only charge during the day, but it's free. It's absolutely free except for the components that I used. So from now on, it's gonna be the device that we use. And I've been using it for weeks. But then what's the next step? Well, what if I have a tractor that's 30 feet away from this? Easy. I find an old extension cord, and I cut the ends off it, and I solder the clamps onto this old 16-gauge extension cord. Let's say it's 50, 75 feet long. And now I can drag that through the barn and hook it up from tractor to tractor to tractor to keep charging all these batteries. Rich, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, first of all, you built a solar trickle charger is what you did, and I totally agree with that philosophy. And I wanted to make a couple of comments on your last caller, actually a couple of answers to his questions. First of all, there is a clean energy source out there, and people are using it kind of quietly as a free energy sources. But the powers that be don't want this getting out, and they're running, I've seen videos where they're running lawnmowers, cars, generators, and homes off of this gas, and that is basically water. Its emission is oxygen. I'm talking hydrogen. So there are alternative energies out there, and I've read that there's quite a bit that the powers that be are stifling because they can't get money from the people regarding this. Now, he was talking about toxicity of solar panels, and I'll be honest with you, anybody who has half a brain obviously has their solar panels outside, so the odds of toxic causes to the owner of the property is almost nil. And most people who have lead-acid batteries don't have them indoors where they live, so there's no gas emission and constraints there. But people who have smart meters who are on grid, I'm reading quite a few articles that smart meters are damaging fetuses and even small children from radiation and a lot of the output it puts out. So not to mention the fact that smart meters tell the powers that be when you're home, what appliances you're using, how much you're using. I mean, who knows how far this is going to go and who's going to end up with this information with all the hacking and I mean, there's nothing private anymore, especially on the internet. So I think there's the consequences of being on grid with the technology that's being offered to the sheeple is way more damaging and toxic regarding health and reasons and privacy and anonymity, if that's your thing, compared to living off grid. And this is totally off tangent here, but I recently read an article that the EU, we all know all the central banks are in cahoots with one another. Well, the European Commission drafted legislation, and it's in small print. It's regarding the context of banning cash, which the powers that be definitely want to, because they want to eliminate all accountability from top down. And they basically say in small print in this legislation that privacy and anonymity does not constitute fundamental human rights, unquote. So the reason why I mention this is because it's an analogy that's very appropriate to what the powers that be want to do. They want to control our own destiny. It's a coup against the bottom 93% to govern themselves. So any time that you can go off grid, any time that you can be self-sufficient, any time you can control your own destiny, you're not going to have to deal with a lot of this crap coming from the top down, which has zero accountability. So that's just something to think about, Vince.
I totally agree with everything you've said. And Mercedes-Benz has been working with hydrogen-powered vehicles for years, and obviously H2O, 2 parts hydrogen, 1. Oh, I just had a little drop out there. 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. That's how water's made. And when it burns, absolutely clean. You're right. But what I was trying to explain is that, yeah, even if we have clean energy, the systems that we build to use it are not clean. You can't get tin, and you can't get lead, and you can't get brass, and you can't get copper and rubber and plastic without some kind of a pollution emission. It's impossible. We don't know how to do that. And so no matter what we do, even if we could generate the electricity cleanly with zero pollution, there is still the transmission issue. And there's still the materials that are used in transmission that are polluting. Absolutely. And if you look at the overhead wires, as they corrode, as they oxidize in the air, in the toxic air that we have, and the water condenses on those wires, when it's cold, and then the water drips on the ground below, it's polluting the ground drop by drop by drop below the power lines. And if you look at the power poles, they're treated with preservatives so that the bugs won't eat the power poles while they're in the ground. That's how they last 40 years. Well, those power poles are treated with toxic substances so toxic that the bugs won't eat them. Can't eat them and survive. Well, they're toxic to us too. So that's just, the base of the power poles. And that's just the wire in the power poles. Then you have to add to that everything else that's in our environment. I was reading an article last evening, and it showed a picture of New York City. And it said this was before the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. New York City was in a cloud of pollution. You could barely see the tops of the skyscrapers. Now, the people below the tops of the skyscrapers didn't know. They were in the cloud. It was just kind of dark. And I was walking around Wall Street back in those days, and it was dark. It really was. And you didn't know it. You didn't know it because most people didn't look up. Well, if you were up and you looked down on the city, you would see that there was a dome of pollution above New York City. And it's not just New York City. It's Chicago, it's LA, it's Silicon Valley, it's Philadelphia, it's every major city. So I don't know of any way of heating, cooling, and surviving without creating pollution, and at the same time sustaining the way we want to live in our disposable society. I don't know of any way. And some of the proof is, if you look in the oceans, you'll see islands of plastic bottles the size of small states just floating there, islands of trash. And that's what we've done. Because we're not smart enough, or we're not sensible enough, or we're not as good as stewards as we should be enough to not do that. And now Japan is considering, the government of Japan is considering declaring war on us. They want to release radioactive waste, toxic waste in the ocean. It's like, we don't know what to do with it. So we're tired of fighting it. Nothing's working. The equipment doesn't work. The robots don't work. Everything is succumbing to the high levels of radiation. So we're just going to let it go into the ocean. So they will have declared war on us again. Once in 1941, December 7th, 1941, when they attacked us at Pearl Harbor, and then when they poisoned the entire planet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very sad. Well, everything's mined from the earth, right? I mean, all of our products, all of our natural resources, everything gets mined from the earth, and you can't get these products, these metals, without mining. I mean, that's just the way it goes. So until the powers that be release these free energies, which I've heard that there's several of them to choose from, we're going to be in this situation. But the powers that be want control. They're addicted to power, money, and control. So that's how they use all this to control the masses. And it's an addiction. And we have to, the bottom 92% of Americans have to stick together, read research, and share information, and make our lives easier.
I've had a lot of fun today talking about the off-grid lifestyle with Rich Shealy. He's quite an expert in it. 10 years under his belt living off-grid. Rich Shealy, I've got a couple questions for you. You know, the big nuts to crack on living off-grid are cooking. That's one. Another one is washing clothes. Another one is refrigeration. And another one of course, is heating and then air conditioning. How did you address the washing clothes issue at your location?
Okay. Now, keep in mind, my little disclaimer is that we choose to live more rugged than most people. Now, I have two choices. I have one of those hand washers that I actually, you know where I bought that from? When I went to speak on your Self-Sufficiency Preparedness Expo. His name is Tom, I think Peterson. He builds them and sells them. And I contacted him.
He's in Arkansas, isn't he?
Pardon me?
I believe he's in Arkansas.
Arkansas, yeah. He's somewhere down by your neck of the woods. And real nice guy. And I bought one of those big washers from him that you move, you gyrate with your hand, and in a few minutes you have clean clothes. So that's one way to go. But, we go to town probably 2-3 days a week. So it really is nothing for us to take a load of washing. We wait 25 minutes. By the time we get the mail, maybe pick up some yogurt or whatever we do, the wash is done, and then we bring it home and we use a Lehman-style dryer that we either leave upstairs, which the wood cook stove dries everything in like 2 hours because heat goes up, travels up, or we use we dry our clothes outside on the line. So that's how we do that. Regarding refrigeration, I have a little Sunfrost refrigerator. They're built in California now. They were originally a European-style refrigerator, and what I mean by that is American-style refrigerators are known for using a lot of energy because the compressor is on the bottom of the refrigerator, and the heat dissipates north. Heat goes high, right? It travels up. So the compressor on this Sunfrost is on the top of the refrigerator, plus I leave it downstairs in the basement, so it's cool enough it hardly ever turns on. During the winter months, as I've mentioned many, many times over radio shows and in my DVD video, I keep my food in front of the French doors on the basement floor with a thermometer, and it stays almost a perfect 32 to 38 degrees during the winter months. So I don't even, I don't even turn on my refrigerator during those months. So we don't use a freezer because we can everything. And this preserves the food. I mean, you check meat in most freezers, you can get freezer burn as early as 1.5 to 2 years, okay? Because we can everything, we don't have to deal with that. We can have 15 years of meat. And what was your third question on that, Vince?
Well, there's heating, cooking, washing clothes, and refrigeration.
We use an Amish-made wood cook stove to cook our meals. During the summer months when we don't have fire, we just have like a Cabela's camping propane stove on the porch. We call that our summer kitchen, and that works out real well. Plus, we also have some solar ovens. For example, we just went out and picked some service berries and raspberries and strawberries and made it crisp with rhubarb, and we put the crisp in the solar oven right on the driveway so the goats couldn't get to it and the dogs couldn't get to it. And in a couple hours, we had a hot dessert. So there's many, plus we do a lot of Dutch oven cooking during spring and fall months. And everything we do is outside the box thinking, and it's a lot of fun. Now, because you mentioned air conditioning, here in the north, we don't have to worry about that. It's definitely an issue by you to get enough energy to live off grid for air conditioning, but for us, it's not an issue.
Yeah. Here's another tip, class. Last night I was experimenting with a crock pot. And if you've got a 100-watt crock pot, you can run that on solar during the day. And if it's hot in the kitchen, put it outside. Put it on the porch. And put the heat out there, not in the house. Rich Scheben, hey, thanks so much for being with us. Rich Scheben's with us on Mondays. Here at USA Preparedness. Thank you so much, Rich Scheben. Friday, John Regan is going to do a broadcast. He'll be back on Friday.